So, who's better, LeBron or Jordan?
Michael.
And why?
I think, you know, I'm biased, obviously, because I played against Michael, and Michael is just one of those type of players that comes along once in a lifetime. Michael, you could never get to. You know what I mean? Mentally, you could never get to him. And believe me, I tried. You know what I mean? I didn't got to a lot of...
Your mama's a bitch.
No, I never said that. No, but no, you just, you know, you could never break his will. You know what I mean? You could never get inside his head. And, you know, with LeBron, I can see that a little bit. You know what I mean? You can get inside his head. He's getting better. You know what I mean? Early on, you probably could say that a lot, but you can see as he matured, you know, he's getting better at that. But Michael, you could never break him. And I think every player that played against him would tell you the same thing. And he made the game look so easy.
Yeah, he did.
Easy, I mean, like uncomplicated. You know what I mean? He didn't have to take the ball between his legs 2 or 3 times to get his shot off. He just get to points on the court and he just knocked down shots. You know, he was just one of those clutch. He's probably, to me, I think he's the best clutch player ever.
Word.
You know what I mean? You never see him ever, the majority of the time, miss game-winning shots. When he had to make a bucket, you knew that he was gonna make that bucket. You know what I'm saying?
I was arguing with this rapper named D. Shep. I was telling him, yo, the difference between Michael Jordan and LeBron James, if LeBron James ain't winning, he'll quit right in the game.
Yeah.
Do you agree or disagree?
I ain't gonna say he gonna quit, but I don't see that what Michael do. Michael gonna fight you to the end.
He gonna fight to the end.
Yeah, he's gonna fight you to the end.
He was sick one time. He had the flu.
Yeah.
My man tried to tell me Michael Jordan was not sick for real. He was doing it as a publicity stunt.
He was sick. He was sick. I know some of the players that
got sick after that, right? Like they was leaving him on. They were like, "Yo, this nigga got me sick." I know he had the flu.
Nah, he definitely was sick. Yeah.
Word.
Yeah.
So that was real.
Yeah, that was real talk. Yeah.
Real.
Yeah.
Come on, man. D. Shep, John Stark said that shit. What you gonna say now? Who was the most competitive team you ever played against, man? Was it the Pacers, the Heat, or?
Man, we had so many back then. You know what I mean? Obviously Chicago, Indiana definitely, because the way they played, it was similar to our style. They had, you know, inside-out game the same way we played. And, you know, we used to hate that. You know what I mean? You hate to play against a team that's similar to you. But, you know, I would say Chicago was probably one of the most competitive teams that we played against.
There are compliments that don't need to be shouted. They echo in silence. And there are truths that can only be spoken by one kind of man. The man who has faced the storm and lived to tell the tale. John Starks was that man. He wasn't a journalist. He wasn't a fan sitting courtside. He was a soldier, a man who collided head-on with Michael Jordan, who had looked into those eyes from an arm's length away, eyes that carried no hatred, no fear, only one thing, absolute certainty that he would win. The 1990 segundo had no social media, no endless slow-motion replays, only sweat, blood, and the pride of 2 cities that wanted to crush each other. New York, the city that never sleeps, born with arrogance in its veins. Chicago, the city of steel and storms, where Jordan was forged, not by fame, but by a single burning question. Who can stop me? Knicks versus Bulls was not a basketball rivalry. It was a war. Every collision was a bullet. Every fall was a wound. If Lakers-Celtics was legend, Knicks-Bulls was apocalypse. And at the center of that war stood not Patrick Ewing, not Charles Oakley, but John Starks, the man carrying the fury of all New York on his shoulders, the one who represented everyone who wanted to watch Michael Jordan fall. But he didn't fall, and that was the nightmare. Years later, Starks would speak slowly, his voice heavy with memory, like tracing an old scar. You couldn't rattle him. He took everything personal. Every night, he came to destroy you. John Starks, that wasn't praise. That was a confession. From a man who had once tried to break Jordan, only to realize that it was his own belief in human limits that shattered first. When John Starks said those words, the basketball world went silent, because no one understood Jordan better than the man who had faced him from a breath away, who had felt that red jersey brush his arm, who had seen that gaze pierce right through his soul. No commentary was needed, no analysis. Just those 3 sentences enough to bury every debate about the GOAT. Michael Jordan never begged for validation. He didn't need to, because his enemies did it for him. Greatness isn't measured by how many people love you. It's measured by how many people tried to destroy you and failed. And when even your fiercest enemy has to whisper your truth, that's not admiration anymore. That's history. Jordan didn't need to shout. He only had to stand there, and those who once hated him had no choice but to call him immortal. That's the kind of greatness no one can recreate. Greatness forged in fire, certified by enemies, and carved into time through eyes that once burned with hatred, now filled with reverence. When your enemy cannot break you, you haven't just won the game. You've conquered time itself, the battlefield of Madison. Where the fire forged a legend, the lights in Madison Square Garden never shone softly. They glared like 1,000 suns staring down on 20 men who had sworn to bleed for their cities. It was 1993. The air was thick enough to slice. The hardwood groaned under the weight of history. You could smell the fear, the sweat, the hate, a cocktail so potent it clung to your lungs. Every shoe that screeched on the court was a spark. Every foul was a bullet fired in a war too personal to be called sport. New York stood for muscle and madness. Patrick Ewing was their fortress, Oakley their hammer, Mason their avalanche. And leading the charge was John Starks, the heartbeat of defiance, the man who looked at Michael Jordan not as a rival, but as a heresy to be erased. And there he was, Michael Jordan, wrapped in that crimson jersey like a warning written in blood. No grin, no words, no wasted emotion. He moved like silence itself, the kind of silence that makes every sound sharper, every heartbeat louder, every opponent smaller. When Jordan walked onto that floor, it didn't matter what song was playing, because he was the rhythm. The crowd began to rumble. "Beat him, Starks, beat him!" And the chant swelled into thunder. It wasn't a game anymore. It was a trial. New York wanted judgment. They wanted to see the god bleed. Then it happened. Starks cut from the corner, leaped between Horace Grant and Jordan, and threw down a dunk so violent it cracked the air. Boom! The garden exploded. 20,000 souls roared, as if the walls themselves were alive. Beer flew. Strangers hugged. Reporters lost their pens. For a heartbeat, Michael Jordan, the untouchable, the immortal, looked human. And in that single heartbeat, John Starks thought he had done it. He thought he had broken the myth. He screamed into the night, chest pounding, face red, veins lit with rage and glory. He wasn't just celebrating a dunk. He was exercising years of humiliation. Every loss, every photo of Jordan holding the trophy that New York could never touch. But Jordan didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He looked up at the scoreboard and smiled. It was a small smile, not of joy, not of pain, a smile of recognition, as if to say, "You've just made the worst mistake of your life." That was the moment the garden didn't hear the thunder anymore, because the storm had just changed sides. The next night, Jordan came back to the same floor. No talk, no show, just that walk, slow, steady, inevitable. You could feel it before the ball even tipped. He wasn't coming to play basketball. He was coming to avenge his name. From the opening possession, the air shifted. Every time Starks touched him, Jordan looked right through him. Every jumper, every fadeaway, every step back felt like a sentence in a sermon only he could deliver. The crowd that once roared now held its breath. Jordan's rhythm turned the garden into a cathedral, and every swish was a note in his requiem for New York. 36 points. That's what the box score said. But it wasn't points, it was punishment, precision, discipline, revenge disguised as art. By the time the buzzer sounded, the crowd that had screamed, "Beat him," could only whisper, "My God," because he had. He had beaten them not just on the scoreboard, but in their spirits. He took the loudest arena in the world and turned it into a library. And when the cameras panned across the court, you could see John Starks, shoulders heaving, eyes hollow, realizing what every man eventually realized against Jordan. You can't kill what doesn't fear death. That's what Madison Square Garden learned that night. You can cut him. You can bruise him. You can even make him bleed. But when the smoke clears and the lights dim, Michael Jordan will still be standing, calm, cold, and burning brighter than before. Because the more you hurt him, the more alive he becomes. He doesn't chase applause. He doesn't play for highlight reels. He plays for something ancient, something that has no name. It's not ego. It's not revenge. It's a vow he made to himself long ago. No one will ever break me. And that night, under the cruel lights of Madison Square Garden, John Starks, the warrior, the believer, the defier, looked into the eyes of that vow and understood the truth that every generation eventually learns. Michael Jordan is not what happens when talent meets work. He's what happens when will refuses to die. He took everything personal. The fire inside the unbreakable. There are players who play for trophies. And then there are those who play for something they can never name. Michael Jordan was one of them. To the world, he was the greatest competitor alive. To the men who faced him, he was something else entirely. A mirror that showed you your limits, and then made you watch him walk right past them. John Starks once said it like a man remembering a haunting. He took everything personal. Those 4 words explain everything. You could bump him in the lane. You could talk trash. You could whisper that he'd lost a step. It didn't matter. He'd hear it not just with his ears, but with his soul. He'd carry it home, burn it in the furnace of his mind, and return the next night as if your words had carved new muscles into his body. Where other men played basketball, Jordan hunted redemption. Every game was an act of revenge. Every possession was a response to something you said, or didn't say, or might have thought. He wasn't competing against you. He was competing against the idea that anyone could doubt him. In the 1,990 seconds, the Knicks' game plan was simple. Hit him, foul him, make him angry, make him lose control. But you can't make a man lose control when his control is his weapon. He thrived on the edge where other players unraveled. Each shove, each insult, each whistle against him, it didn't crack him, it fed him. You could see it in his eyes. The more chaos you threw at him, the calmer he became. That calmness, that eerie stillness before the storm, was the deadliest thing about him. It wasn't arrogance. It was focus refined into something almost divine. Starks said, "We tried to make him mad, but that was the problem. When you made him mad, you lost." Because when Jordan got mad, he didn't yell, he executed. He broke you piece by piece, shot by shot, look by look. He would score, stare at you once not to humiliate you, but to let you feel the distance between what you were and what he had become. Every time you thought you'd figured him out, he added something new, a move, a counter, a rhythm you couldn't follow. It was like trying to punch smoke. The harder you swung, the more it wrapped around you. He remembered everything. A headline, a quote, a comment from a rookie who didn't know better. He'd tuck it away in the quiet of his mind like a blade waiting for the right time to draw. That was Jordan's secret. He didn't forget. He collected, and every collection became a symphony of destruction. He didn't just defeat you, he rewrote your memory of yourself. By the time you left the court, you weren't angry at him anymore. You were angry at the part of you that believed you could ever touch him. That's what Starks understood years later. The hatred, the rage, the rivalry, none of it broke him. If anything, it baptized him. The more they hated, the higher he climbed. Every insult was gasoline. Every doubt was oxygen. And Michael Jordan was fire. Not the kind of fire that flickers in a cold room, but the kind that burns cities to prove a point. He didn't play basketball. He purified it until only the truth was left. And that truth, as every man who ever faced him eventually learned, was simple and cruel. You don't beat Michael Jordan. You just survive the night. He took everything personal. That's what made him untouchable. That's what made him human. And not human at all. The mind game. The war you couldn't see. By the time you faced Michael Jordan, the game was already half lost. You hadn't missed a shot yet. You hadn't even touched the ball. But something in you, something small, something human had already started to tremble. That was his real arena. Not the court, not the scoreboard. To your mind, John Starks knew it. Every Knick knew it. You could feel it in the tunnel before the lights came on. That heavy silence when Jordan walked past, when 20,000 people roared but his footsteps somehow drowned them all. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He carried inevitability like other men carried sweat. Players talked about his hang time, his fadeaway, his hands. But the real weapon was that stillness, that terrifying calm. He looked at you as if he'd already read the ending of the story and was just here to act it out. That's what broke people. Not the points, not the highlights. The certainty. When you guard most players, you prepare for their moves. When you guarded Jordan, you prepared for your own collapse. He'd study you, your habits, your eyes, the way you breathed before a shot. Then, mid-game, he'd steal them from you. He'd fake your rhythm back at you until you forgot what it felt like to be yourself. And once you doubted your own instincts, he owned you. That was the genius. Jordan didn't just beat opponents, he erased them. Starks once said, he made you second-guess everything. You'd be doing your job and still feel like you were failing. Because you were. Not on the stat sheet, but in the soul. He made professionals question their purpose, their talent, their courage. In real time, under the lights, with the world watching. He didn't trash talk to provoke you. He talked to guide you, down a path he'd already mapped. He'd whisper, "That's all you got?" And suddenly, you'd start forcing shots you'd never take. You weren't playing basketball anymore. You were chasing ghosts that he'd planted in your head. That's why Jordan could control tempo like no one else. He wasn't managing the ball, he was managing your pulse. When he slowed down, you panicked. When he sped up, you gasped. He was the metronome of the game. And every player, friend or foe, moved to his rhythm whether they realized it or not. Even when he missed, it didn't shake him. Because the miss wasn't failure, it was information. He'd file it away, dissect it, and the next time down, He'd use it to kill you cleaner. That was the unseen war. A war of silence, eye contact, and inevitability. The Knicks tried to drag him into chaos. They fouled, shoved, screamed, but chaos was Jordan's oxygen. He'd breathe it in, turn it into stillness, and feed it back to them until they suffocated on their own noise. Madison Square Garden was supposed to break him. Instead, it became his cathedral. Every hostile chant, every boo, every insult, he turned them into hymns that praised his name. Because that's what the great ones do. They don't run from the noise. They become the silence that devours it. By the fourth quarter, the Knicks weren't guarding Jordan anymore. They were guarding a story they already knew the ending of. And when the buzzer sounded, he'd walk off without looking back, leaving you to drown in the echo of your own disbelief. That was the real Jordan, not the man who could jump, not the man who could score, but the man who could own your mind and make you thank him for it. He didn't just play the game, he became the game. And once he did, the rest of us were just trying to keep up with time. The fear. When an entire city bowed to one man, New York never feared anyone. Not kings, not legends, not gods. The city that booed presidents, heckled heroes, and crowned its own champions had built its entire identity on defiance. But in the 1,990 seconds under the lights of Madison Square Garden, even New York learned how to be silent. It started as tension, a strange stillness that crept in every time Jordan touched the ball. 20,000 people, loud, vicious, roaring, would go quiet for just a second, as if the entire arena had inhaled at once, afraid to exhale until he missed. But he never missed. That's how fear works. Not with noise, but with expectation. It wasn't what Jordan did that terrified them. It was what everyone knew he was about to do. You could see it in the eyes of defenders, in John Starks, in Oakley, in Mason, the realization that no matter how perfectly they played, the ending was already written. Starks said it years later, shaking his head like he still didn't understand it. We hated him, but we respected him. He had that look you knew when he had it. The game was over. That look. Every player who faced Jordan knows it, the narrowing of the eyes, the calm before detonation. He didn't snarl, didn't curse, didn't even blink. He just looked. And somehow, that look carried more violence than any shove, more weight than any punch. It told you, I'm not leaving this floor without your soul. And once he decided that, the rest was ritual. New York threw everything at him. Bodies, traps, double teams, words sharp enough to cut glass. Nothing worked. He'd take the hit, glide through the paint, and score like pain was just another part of the plan. It wasn't athleticism anymore. It was inevitability in motion. Every shot felt personal. Every drive a sermon. Every jumper a knife turned slowly. And when the ball slipped through the net, the Garden didn't bow it sigged. A sound of surrender disguised as breath. The kind of sound cities make when they realize they've met someone bigger than themselves. Because Jordan didn't just beat New York, he owned it. He didn't conquer with arrogance or noise. He conquered with silence. The silence that comes after truth, when denial finally collapses into awe. The Knicks were supposed to be the villains of his story. Instead, they became the mirror that reflected his legend. Every loss, every heartbreak, every near miss at the Garden didn't stain Jordan's image, it gilded it. Because true greatness doesn't need mercy, it needs resistance. And what New York gave him was exactly that, the perfect enemy. Proud enough to hate him, great enough to test him, and human enough to lose to him. By the end, even the fans who despised him found themselves watching in reverent silence, their hatred melting into something unfamiliar respect. They didn't cheer, but they stared. Because you can't boo truth. You can only recognize it. That's what fear looks like when it evolves. It stops screaming and starts listening. When Jordan walked off the court that night, the crowd didn't rain curses or bottles. They just watched him go. The red jersey, the sweat glistening under the lights, the number 23 disappearing into the tunnel like a prophecy fulfilled. And somewhere deep in the noise, you could feel New York. The city that never bows. Bow, not out of defeat, out of understanding. Because for the first time in a long time, they had seen something pure, something beyond anger or rivalry or pride. They had seen a man so locked into destiny that not even the roar of the greatest city on earth could reach him. You can hate him, you can fight him, but you will remember him. Because Michael Jordan didn't play in New York. He haunted it. 30 years later, when hate turned into worship, time has a way of humbling even the loudest warriors. The bruises fade, the noise dies down, but the memories, they stay sharp, like broken glass under the skin. 3 decades after those blood-soaked nights in Madison Square Garden, John Starks no longer clenches his fists when he hears Michael Jordan's name. He exhales, because now he knows. He knows that what they fought against wasn't just a man. It was an idea so ruthless, so relentless, that it demanded to be remembered forever. When interviewers ask him today, he doesn't hesitate. His voice no longer shakes with bitterness. It carries something softer, something almost holy. He was the ultimate competitor, Starks says. You had to bring your soul to play him. And in that single line lies a lifetime of acceptance. Because to face Jordan was never just to defend a jump shot. It was to confront your own reflection, to test what you were made of, and to find out, painfully, that you weren't made of the same thing. Back then, Starks thought Jordan's fire came from arrogance. Now, he understands it came from purpose. Jordan didn't play to embarrass people. He played to honor the standard he built inside himself, a standard so high it suffocated everyone who stood near it. Every athlete chases greatness, but Jordan was greatness, and that's what made him unbearable to play against, and impossible not to respect. The footage hasn't aged. The jumpers still float like prayers answered midair. The fadeaway still lands with the rhythm of a heartbeat. But what has aged beautifully is the silence that follows each shot. The same silence that once felt like fear now feels like reverence. Because time does that. It turns wounds into lessons. It turns enemies into storytellers. And it turns hate into a strange kind of worship. For Starks, every scar has become a badge. Every failure, a piece of evidence that he once stood in the same arena as the impossible and survived. He smiles now when he tells the story of that dunk, not out of pride, but out of gratitude. Because even though the Knicks lost that war, he knows what very few men on earth can say. He faced perfection and lived to speak about it. That's why, after all these years, the words, "you couldn't rattle him," don't sound like defeat anymore. They sound like respect. They sound like peace. Because to rattle Jordan was never the goal. To stand against him, to endure the storm, that was the honor. And that's the quiet truth that only time can teach. What once felt like pain was actually privilege. What once burned like humiliation now glows like history. Michael Jordan didn't just beat teams. He baptized generations. He taught every man who faced him what pressure really is, and every man who watched him what greatness truly costs. And now, 30 years later, the man who once hated him most says his name not with venom, but with reverence. He made you better, Starks admits. He made all of us better. The rivalry is over. The noise is gone. What remains is legend, because legends don't die, they echo. And in that echo, somewhere between the cheers and the tears, you can still hear John Starks whisper the truth that ends all debate. He was the greatest. He still is. The legacy. The light that never fades. Greatness has many faces, but only one has never dimmed. Only one still glows, long after the cheers have died, long after the sneakers have stopped squeaking on hardwood, long after the game itself has changed beyond recognition. That face is Michael Jordan's. He doesn't belong to a decade anymore. He belongs to time itself. Every highlight reel, every young star, every debate on TV, they all orbit the same Sunday. Even those who came after him, who grew up idolizing him, who tried to escape his shadow, eventually realized there is no outside of Michael Jordan. He is the map. He is what every player, every fan, every era measures itself against. Not because of the trophies, not because of the rings, but because of that aura, that impossible standard of focus, fire, and finality. The kind of greatness that doesn't need to be defended, because it already won the argument before it began. John Starks once stood in front of him, trying to break him. Now he stands behind his name, protecting it, honoring it. That's what legacy does. It turns adversaries into witnesses. It makes even your enemies your historians. Decades after his last shot, kids who never saw him play wear his jersey like armor. They don't know every stat, but they feel the myth. They feel it every time they lace up shoes that bear his name, every time they whisper, 23, like it's both a number and a prayer. Because that's what Michael Jordan became. A prayer for excellence. He's the ghost in every locker room mirror. The whisper that tells every rookie, work harder, focus deeper, never break. When players hit a game winner today, they pump their fists and say, that was my Jordan moment. When they miss, they shake their heads and say, he would have made that. He became the unseen coach of every generation. The spirit that teaches through pressure. The shadow that demands perfection. And still, after all this time, the stories haven't faded. They've multiplied. Each retelling adds another layer of myth, another glint to the crown. From opponents who once cursed his name, to teammates who still tell his stories in awe, to fans who pass down memories like family heirlooms. His legend has become oxygen for the game itself. Jordan isn't nostalgia. He's continuity, the thread that ties every era together. Before him, the game was ambition. After him, it became obsession. Because Michael Jordan taught the world one unbreakable truth: that greatness isn't talent, it's the refusal to be anything less. He showed what it means to give everything, to demand the impossible, to treat failure not as a wound, but as a weapon sharpened by will. And that's why his light never fades. Because it doesn't depend on the crowd, or the scoreboard, or the cameras. It burns from within, and the world just happens to see the glow. John Starks once said, "He made all of us better." But what he didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that Jordan didn't just make them better at basketball. He made them better at being alive. He proved that the limits we accept are lies, and that sometimes a single human being can rewrite the laws of effort, pain, and possibility. That's the true legacy. Not the rings, not the stats, but the mirror he left behind. A mirror that still asks everyone who looks into it, are you willing to suffer for greatness? Are you willing to bleed for it, burn for it, die for it, and rise again anyway? That's why he remains untouchable. That's why his name still commands silence. Because greatness doesn't retire. It lingers. It echoes. It waits. And every time a kid somewhere picks up a ball, looks at the rim, and whispers a name before taking the shot, the light flickers again, as if to remind the universe, he never left. The truth that ends all debates, when the noise fades, when the lights dim, when the last echo of applause dissolves into memory, all that remains is truth. And the truth is simple. It always has been. Michael Jordan was, and is, the measure of greatness. You can weigh the numbers, argue the eras, worship longevity, dissect efficiency, but none of it touches the essence of the man. Because greatness was never about statistics. It was about spirit. Jordan's spirit, unbending, unbreakable, unrelenting, is what separates myth from man. He was not made of the same material as the rest. Where others saw pressure, he saw purpose. Where others broke, he built. Where others played the game, he became it. John Starks once faced that spirit and hated it, then feared it, and finally bowed to it. And in that arc from fury to reverence lies the proof no trophy could ever hold. Because when your fiercest rival becomes your witness, when your enemy becomes your historian, when those who tried to destroy you become the guardians of your legend, the argument is over. Michael Jordan didn't just defeat opponents, he converted them. He didn't just win championships, he rewrote what winning meant. He didn't just dominate an era, he defined all that came after. Every whisper of the next Jordan only strengthens his immortality. Every comparison proves the distance that still exists between greatness and godhood. Because there is no next. There is only him. He transcended the game, not by escaping it, but by mastering every inch of it, mind, body, and soul. And in doing so, he revealed something terrifyingly beautiful. That perfection, even for a moment, is possible. And that once the world has seen it, it can never unsee it. Decades have passed. Generations have changed. But the truth hasn't moved an inch. It stands where it always stood. Under the weight of 6 banners, in the shadow of 1 number, in the heart of everyone who has ever picked up a ball and whispered his name before they took the shot. Michael Jordan is not just part of basketball's history. He is its heartbeat. And as long as the game exists, his pulse will never stop echoing through it. So let the debates rage. Let the eras shift. Let the world chase new heroes. It doesn't matter. Because greatness is not a title you win. It's a truth you leave behind. And the truth, now and forever, is this. When the game needed a god, it sent Michael Jordan, and nothing has been the same since.